My name is Eliza, and this is the story of how I built an empire on fire, spice, and heritage, only to watch the man I trusted try to burn it all down with me inside. But he forgot something crucial. I've been working with fire my whole life. I know how to control it, and I know how to walk away from the ashes while the arsonist gets trapped in the blaze. For 7 years, my restaurant, Hearth Vine, was the most celebrated dining experience in the city. It was my heart, my soul, my family's legacy brought to life on a plate. But to the world, it was the masterpiece of my business partner, Julian. It all started in a forgotten corner of the city's old industrial district, in a derelict brick building that had been a textile mill a century ago. I was running a small pop-up dinner club out of my apartment, making food inspired by my grandmother's recipes, wild, untamed flavors from the mountains where she grew up. I didn't follow culinary school rules. I followed instinct. I cooked with memory, with emotion. Julian was one of my guests one night, a handsome, impeccably dressed man with a shark smile and the kind of easy charm that could make you trust him with your life savings. He was a former investment banker who had decided his new passion was curating bespoke experiences. He tasted my food, a slow-braised wild boar with juniper and smoked paprika, and his eyes lit up, not with pleasure, but with opportunity. "This," he said, cornering me after the dinner, "this raw, authentic talent is a brand. It's a story, but a story needs a storyteller. You have the gift, Eliza, but I can build the stage." I was young and naive, tired of cooking in a cramped kitchen. The idea of a real restaurant, a real platform for my heritage, was a dream I barely dared to have. Julian made it feel possible. He found the old mill, and while I was initially intimidated by its cavernous, decaying space, he painted a picture of rustic elegance, of exposed brick and reclaimed wood. He would handle the money, the design, the business. All I had to do was cook. It was a siren song, and I followed it willingly. We became partners. He put up the capital from his network of wealthy investors, and I put up my entire being. My name wasn't on the lease, a detail Julian assured me was just a formality to streamline the investment process. "Your ownership is in the operational agreement, Liza," he'd said, using that slick nickname he gave me. "That's what matters." I believed him. The centerpiece of the restaurant was my one non-negotiable demand: the hearth. It was a massive, wood-fired brick oven, a custom design based on the one my grandfather, a stonemason, had built at our family's farmhouse. I oversaw its construction myself, laying the bricks with a team I hired, ensuring every curve and every flue was perfect. It wasn't just an oven. It was the soul of the kitchen. It was where I baked our signature sourdough, blistered our vegetables, and slow-roasted meats for 14 hours until they fell off the bone. It was my connection to my past, the fiery heart of every dish we served. The Vine part of our name came from my family's small, secluded farm in the countryside, a place that grew heirloom vegetables and rare herbs you couldn't find anywhere else. I had an exclusive, ironclad agreement with my cousins who ran it. They supplied only us. That was the deal. Hearth Vine wasn't just a name. It was a statement of origin. My origin. The first 2 years were a blur of 18-hour days and constant exhaustion. I lived and breathed that kitchen. I developed every recipe, trained every cook, and inspected every single plate before it left the pass. My hands were perpetually callous, smelling of smoke, garlic, and thyme. While I was searing, braising, and plating, Julian was out front, playing the part of the visionary restaurateur. He was brilliant at it. He schmoozed with critics, charmed celebrities, and posted beautifully filtered photos on Instagram, always with long, poetic captions about his philosophy on food. He talked about my cooking as if it were a raw element he had discovered and tamed. In interviews, he'd say things like, "Eliza is a phenomenal culinary artisan, a true rustic talent. My job is to take that raw passion and refine it, to build a narrative around it that resonates with a modern palate." He was the artist. I was merely the paint. The restaurant exploded. We got a glowing 3-star review in the city's biggest paper. The critic praised the bold, elemental flavors, and the genius of the hearth. My genius. But the review ended by calling Julian the charismatic maestro, orchestrating this beautiful symphony. I tried not to let it bother me. We were a team. His success was my success, or so I told myself, late at night, as I sketched out new menu ideas while he was out accepting awards. The more famous the restaurant became, the more Julian began to interfere in the kitchen, the one place that was supposed to be my domain. He'd bring in his investor friends and demand I change a dish to suit their less adventurous tastes. He started questioning my food costs, suggesting we switch from the small local farms I'd cultivated relationships with to cheaper, large-scale suppliers. We have to think about scale, Eliza, about margins, he'd argue. Your authenticity is starting to cost us. The arguments became more frequent. One day, I came in to find that he had signed a contract with a massive food distributor without telling me. The heirloom carrots from my family's farm were replaced by perfectly uniform, tasteless orange sticks. The wild game was replaced with factory-farmed meat. When I confronted him, he was dismissive. No one can tell the difference, he said with a wave of his hand. It's about the brand, not the minutiae. The story is what sells. That was the first time I realized he didn't just misunderstand my food. He had contempt for it. He saw it as a commodity, a prop in the theater he was directing. The final straw, the event that would change everything, was our nomination for the prestigious Golden Ladle Award. It was the highest honor in the culinary world, the equivalent of an Oscar. Just being nominated put us in the stratosphere. Julian was ecstatic. He saw it as his coronation. He planned a massive party at the restaurant on the night of the award ceremony, inviting every food critic, blogger, and investor he knew. He insisted we cater it ourselves, stretching my already exhausted kitchen staff to its breaking point. This is our moment, he told me, his eyes gleaming. We need to show them what Hearth Vine is truly capable of. The night of the gala was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. We were live streaming the ceremony on large screens set up around the restaurant. The air was thick with tension and expensive perfume. I was in my chef's whites, running the pass, while Julian, in a tailored tuxedo, worked the room. When our category was announced, a hush fell over the crowd. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, wiping my sweaty palms on my apron, and then we won. The room erupted. People were screaming, cheering, hugging. Julian was lifted onto someone's shoulders, a triumphant king. I felt a surge of pride, so intense it almost brought me to tears. We did it. All the sacrifice, all the work, it was worth it. Julian, beaming, took the microphone from the Nitschgaie. Thank you, he shouted, silencing the room. This is an incredible honor, an honor that belongs to the whole team. But as we all know, to stay on top, a great brand must evolve. It cannot be held back by sentimentality or outdated methods. My blood ran cold. I knew that phrase, outdated methods. It was what he called my cooking style. He continued, his voice resonating through the speakers. Hearth Vine was built on a foundation of rustic authenticity. But to reach the next level, to become a global brand, we need to embrace a new era of refined excellence. That's why I am so incredibly proud to announce our new direction. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me, standing frozen in the kitchen doorway. There was no warmth in his gaze, only cold, hard ambition. We are bringing in a new creative force to guide us into the future. A chef with world-renowned experience, a master of modern technique. Please give a warm welcome to our new executive culinary director, Chef Antoine Dubois, a tall, handsome man with slick back hair, a famous chef from Paris I recognized from magazine covers, walked onto the makeshift stage and shook Julian's hand. The crowd applauded, confused but intrigued. My heart hammered against my ribs. New executive culinary director? What was he talking about? This was my kitchen. Julian wasn't finished. He put his arm around Antoine. And what about the woman who started it all? He asked the crowd rhetorically. Our dear Eliza? Well, I am thrilled to announce that we are promoting her. We are taking her out of the grueling, day-to-day pressure of the kitchen and appointing her to a new role, one that better suits her unique talents. She will be our head of legacy recipe preservation. Head of legacy recipe preservation. It sounded like something you'd do for a museum piece, for something already dead. He was publicly, humiliatingly, casting me aside. He was thanking me for my service and showing me the door in front of the entire world that I had helped build. He was calling me a relic in my own home. The room was spinning. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and schadenfreude. They were all watching, waiting for my reaction. Would I cry? Would I scream? Would I scream? Would I throw something? Julian's smile was triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken my soul, polished it up for the world to see, and could now discard the messy, inconvenient parts of its origin. He had the investors, the lease, the award, and the famous new chef. He thought he had everything. I looked at him, at his perfect suit, and his smug, victorious face. I looked at the new chef, who was now shaking hands with my cooks, my team. And then I looked past them all, at the roaring fire in the mouth of the brick oven, my hearth. A small, cold calmness washed over me. I slowly untied my apron, the one stained with sauce and soot, and dropped it to the floor. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out the back door, into the cool night air. I left the sounds of the party, of his victory, behind me. As I walked down the dark alley, the cold shock began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning rage. He had announced a new direction for Hearth Vine. He had forgotten one fundamental truth. Without me, there was no hearth. There was no vine. There was only an empty mortgage building and a chef who had no idea how to light the fire. He thought he was starting a new chapter. He had no idea he had just handed me the match to burn his entire story to the ground. I didn't go home. I didn't cry. The shock had frozen the tears in my ducts, turning them into shards of ice in my veins. I walked the 3 blocks to a quiet, dimly lit bar I knew, a place where no one from my world would ever go. I ordered a glass of whiskey, the fiery liquid a pale imitation of the inferno raging inside me. I took out my phone. My first call wasn't to my mother or a friend for comfort. It was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who would help me with the initial partnership agreements. I woke her up. I explained the situation in a low, steady voice, the words precise and cold. I could hear her tapping on a keyboard as I spoke. "He called you head of legacy recipe preservation?" she asked, a dangerous quiet in her own voice. "Oh, he's going to regret that." My second call was to my cousin, Marco, who ran the family farm, the Ovine in Hearth Vine. It was past midnight, but I knew he'd be awake, checking his greenhouses. I told him what happened. I didn't need to ask him what to do. There was a long silence. Then I heard his deep, rumbling voice. "The trucks don't roll tomorrow, Eliza. Not one leaf. The vine is closed." My final call was to the mason, Mr. Novak, the old artisan who had helped me build the hearth. I asked him if he and his crew were available for a deconstruction and transport job. "It's a delicate process," he said. "For you, Eliza, we start tomorrow." The next morning, I slept in for the first time in 7 years. I woke not to the jarring blare of a 4 a.m. alarm, but to the soft light of the sun filtering through my window. I made myself coffee, showered, and put on a charcoal gray suit I had bought once for an investor meeting and never worn. It felt like armor. I arrived at the restaurant at precisely 11 o'clock. Through the large front windows, I could see a scene of utter chaos. The new celebrity chef, Antoine Dubois, was gesturing wildly, his face a mask of Gallic fury. Julian was on his phone, his back ramrod straight, his voice a low snarl. My entire kitchen team was standing by their stations, arms crossed, refusing to work. The hearth, the great brick heart of the restaurant, was cold and dark. I walked in. The buzz of conversation died instantly. Every eye turned to me. Julian ended his call and strode towards me, his face thunderous. "What is the meaning of this, Eliza?" he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "My produce delivery never arrived. My cooks are staging a mutiny." "What did you do?" I smiled, a small, calm expression that seemed to enrage him further. "Your produce delivery?" I asked, tilting my head. "That was never your delivery, Julian. That was mine. My lawyer, Ms. Davis walked in behind me, carrying a leather briefcase. She nodded to me and then addressed Julian. Mr. Croft, she began, her voice cutting through the tension. My client, Ms. Eliza Reyes, is here to discuss the dissolution of her operational involvement and the reclamation of her personal assets. Antoine Dubois stepped forward. This is absurd. I have a kitchen to run, a menu to implement. We have reservations booked for weeks based on the award. He looked at me with disdain. I cannot create my art in these primitive conditions. The oven, it is cold. How does one turn it on? I looked at the magnificent brick structure. You can't, I said simply. It's not yours to use. Miss Davis opened her briefcase on the host stand, pulling out a sheaf of papers. Let's start with the Vine, she said. This is a copy of the exclusive supply chain contract between Ms. Reyes Family Farm and Ms. Reyes herself. Personally, the LLC known as Hearth Vine was merely the beneficiary of a temporary verbal licensing agreement, which my client has now rescinded. As of last night, all deliveries have ceased. The menu, which is comprised of 87% proprietary ingredients from this source, can no longer be produced. Julian paled. You can't do that. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. Miss Davis raised an eyebrow. Is it? Or was it a breach of fiduciary duty to publicly humiliate and effectively fire your partner, the sole creator of the very product you sell, thereby putting the entire enterprise at risk? I suspect the investors you answer to would be very interested in that distinction. She then pulled out a second, thicker document. And now, she said, her voice dropping slightly, we come to the hearth. This document is a legally registered asset declaration, along with the original architectural plans and notarized statements from the construction firm. They confirm that the wood-fired oven, the centerpiece of this establishment, is the personal private property of Ms. Reyes. It was never sold to the LLC. It was never listed as a business asset. It was, for all legal intents and purposes, on loan. Daddies, I stepped forward. I've hired a crew, Julian. They'll be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to begin dismantling it. We'll be very careful, but I can't make any guarantees about the structural integrity of the surrounding wall. You might want to have a contractor on standby. Julian looked as if I had physically struck him. He stared at the oven, then at me, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on him. The award, the investors, the celebrity chef, all of it was meaningless. He didn't have a restaurant. He had a room. A beautifully designed, very expensive room with a hole in the wall and nothing to serve. At that moment, my sous chef, Maria, a woman I had trained from a dishwasher, stepped forward. We quit, she said, her voice ringing with clarity. She dropped her apron on the floor. One by one, my entire line of cooks, the pastry chef, even the prep staff, followed suit, their aprons piling up at Julian's feet. They turned and walked past me, each giving me a small, firm nod as they left. Julian sank into one of his designer chairs, his face ashen. Antoine Dubois looked from the useless oven to the empty kitchen, muttered a string of French curses, and stormed out the front door, shouting into his phone at his agent. Ms. Davis looked down at the defeated man. So, my client is prepared to offer you two options. Julian looked up, his eyes hollow. Option 1, she said. Ms. Reyes walks away with her personal property and her supply chain. You are left with the remainder of a 10-year lease, a staff of 0, a tarnished award, and a group of very angry, very wealthy investors to whom you will have to explain how your multi-million-dollar asset vanished overnight. I imagine the lawsuits will be extensive. She paused. Option 2. You and your partners agree to immediately dissolve the current LLC. You will sign over the lease and all remaining tangible assets, the tables, the chairs, the liquor license at Ms. Reyes' new corporation for the sum of $1. This will satisfy your liabilities and allow you to walk away. You will also sign a comprehensive non-disclosure and non-compete agreement that will bar you from opening another restaurant in this city for 20 years. He stared at her, speechless. It wasn't a choice. It was a checkmate. It took less than 48 hours. There were frantic calls, threats from investors, but faced with total financial ruin, they forced Julian's hand. I sat in my lawyer's office as he signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly. He wouldn't look at me. He, the great storyteller, had lost control of the narrative, and it had destroyed him. 1 year later, the restaurant reopened. I renamed it. I simply called it Hearth. It was my name above the door now. The room was warmer, the menu was bolder, and the food was more honest than ever. I didn't need Julian's narrative anymore. The food told its own story. We were fully booked a year in advance. I won the golden ladle again, this time by myself. When I walked onto the stage, I thanked my grandmother, my family, and the team that stood by me. I never once mentioned Julian's name. I heard he lost everything. His investors sued him for misrepresentation, and he ended up moving back to his parents' house in another state, a pariah in the two industries I'd tried to conquer. Sometimes, late at night, after the last customer has gone and the kitchen is quiet, I stand before the hearth, its embers glowing softly. The victory doesn't taste like revenge anymore. It tastes like freedom. It tastes like authenticity. Julian was right about one thing. He built a stage, but he forgot that a stage is just an empty platform without the performance. I learned the hardest way that you can't trust someone else to tell your story. I took back my story, my kitchen, my fire, and now I'm the only one who decides how brightly it burns.